Welcome to part 2 of our charity rocking horse build. Now all of my parts are clean and sanded, all the edges are nice and smooth and rounded over, and you might think it's time for assembly, but you should always ask yourself when you're building a project if it makes more sense to pre-finish before assembly. And in a case like this, we have a lot of interior parts and things that it's going to be really difficult to finish later on. So definitely keep that in mind as part of your finish strategy, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Now you have some choices with your finish. You basically want to have accented pieces on this. The mane is going to be a little bit darker, the saddle should be darker, the tail should be darker. All the attachments you want to be a little bit darker just because it makes it look cooler. And you can even paint them if you want to. You certainly don't have to use stain if you choose not to. So you have to develop a strategy to make this work. I'm actually going to be using stain for all my darker parts. Staining these parts is going to be fairly easy because they're detached, they're standalone. But staining the mane is going to be a little bit tricky because it's all one piece. How do we make sure we only get stain in the area where the mane is and not on the rest of the piece? So let me show you a little trick I came up with, and hopefully it'll help you out. When I first announced that this was going to be the project that we're building for the charity build, I got some feedback from folks who have made it before, just giving me advice on time savers and things that might make the process a little easier. And of course, my goal is to pass those on to you. Now, concerning this differential staining area, one piece of advice in particular from Jay, he goes by JWC in the Wood Talk Online forum, he said when he made them, he had a little bit of trouble with that stain and not getting the stain to run from one area to the other. His suggestion was to take a knife, basically an X-Acto knife or something like that, and scribe that line into the wood. And essentially what that does is it gives you a little V groove that gives you a little bit of a border. So if you're using a stain, the stain will settle into that groove and won't really go beyond it. So it makes it a little bit easier than trying to very carefully apply that stain. So we're going to use a concept very similar to that. I don't necessarily trust myself freehand or even following a pencil line for this. So what I did was I took my templates and I made myself a sweet little mullet, also known as a horse mane, but it looks like a mullet to me. So the idea is you're going to take this to your blank, match it up where it needs to go, and then you now have a nice guide that you could either take a knife or, well, let me show you exactly what I'm going to use for this. I'm going to use something a little bit more blunt-edged. What I'm going to use is a good old nail set. The thinnest one I have here gives me a nice deep groove that'll be a little bit wider than what you would get from a knife, but I kind of like that. It gives me a little bit more room for error here. So what I'm going to do is place my main template here, make sure it's all lined up. This doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. Make sure it's pretty well lined up. And then all I need to do is carefully trace around my template. Now I'm going to flip it over and we'll do the same thing on the other side. And on the end grain here, you're just going to want to take a square, line it up with your lines, and put your groove right across the front as well. Now I'm going to employ a very specific finishing regimen that's going to get me the color effect that I want. And just keep in mind, there are hundreds of ways that you could accomplish this, whether you're using paints or stains, HVLP, brushing methods, depending on what you want to do. I think this is a fairly approachable method, and that's why I think it's a good one to cover here. Now, instead of going from start to finish and explaining the entire theory on how this is going to work, I think it's easier to go step by step. Now that first step is a coat of amber shellac over everything, including all of our small pieces here. Everything is going to get this amber shellac. Now this is right off the shelf from Home Depot, Lowe's, your home center. And shellac itself, first of all, it's a great finish, but it comes in different colors sometimes. You can get blonde, you can get, if you want something really clear, you go for like super blonde. There's also amber, orange, garnet, and a few other crazy colors if you really get into the business of shellac. But in this case, the amber shellac offers not only protection by providing a film and sealing the wood, but it also gives us this nice sort of orangey warm color tone, which is great for pine. If I can avoid staining both of these sections with an actual stain, that's going to make life a whole lot easier. So for me personally, I think this is a great way to go. So what I'm going to do is load up my HVLP gun because I bought this stuff in a can. It sprays beautifully. So if you have a turbine or some other HVLP system, feel free to use it. But keep in mind, you don't have to have an HVLP to do this. They sell this stuff in a spray can. So just get one of the rattle cans and you could do exactly what I'm doing. If if you're not comfortable brushing, or personally I like the idea of spray because it's fast and it allows me to put in a very light coat and control the thickness of that layer, which I think is pretty important for this portion of the project, because all we want to do is do sort of a semi-pre-seal. Okay, I'm not looking to build a huge film right now, so a very light coat on all these parts. Now after about an hour, you can give everything a light sanding with some 320 grit paper. And that's the great thing about shellac, because it dries so fast. Just a nice light touch to smooth everything out. That also includes all of our smaller pieces too. Now the stain I'm going to use here is a General Finishes brown mahogany gel stain. And I like the gel stain because it has this real nice thick formula that's a little bit easier to control. So I'm just going to use a little piece of shop rag here, shop paper towel, and I'm going to sort of trace along this line, trying not to go over it. So just keep a steady hand and make sure you have your rag here folded into a sharp point. I'm staying away from the line as I'm spreading it across. And I don't want to go right to the line until I'm pretty sure that I've got most of the stain, the heavy stain, off of the rag. See, so I could just kind of distribute it nice and evenly right up to that line. And these little circle motions sort of allow me to follow the border line pretty easily. I also recommend that you practice on the inside of the body first instead of the outside. The outside is the side that everybody's going to see. So better off practicing on the inside. Once my line is done all the way across, I can come back with a little bit more stain and hit the areas that I skipped over. Now with a clean bit of rag, I'm going to come from the clean side into the stain area and just wipe through. You can see I'm trying to use a clean section each time so I don't contaminate the clean area. And now I will just go and lightly rub the surface with the grain. Now I'm going to add some stain here to the edge, because obviously it's not going to look very good if it's not completely stained all the way around. Then I'm just going to wipe off the excess and then work on the other side. Now the rest of the pieces, just get a full-on stain, and the only ones that we aren't going to do that to are the internal support pieces, basically the two trapezoids. And just a quick tip, if you put a screw in one of the pilot holes, you have a nice handle to hold on to as you apply the stain. So I let my horse's sweet mullet dry overnight, and this is an oil-based stain, so you want to give it enough time to cure before doing anything else with it. So we're ready for the next step. But before we jump to that, I wanted to take a minute to explain a little bit more about the method to my madness here and why we're doing things the way that we're doing them. The whole thing got a coat of shellac, right? Very light coat of shellac. The shellac partially seals the surface. One light coat isn't enough to make it completely impervious to liquid. It will still absorb some liquid, but it certainly slows it down. So if I were to use a regular oil-based stain on this, the real liquidy stuff, chances are it would just smear over the surface and it may not really ever cure properly. It may even, by this time today, may still be sticky. So that's why I use a gel stain. The gel stain is a thicker formula. It looks kind of like loose pudding and doesn't really require absorption into the wood fibers to cure. So it's perfect for this application. And the key is, since I do have shellac on the rest of the body, if a little bit of stain gets over to the clear side, all I have to do is come back with a little bit of sandpaper and sand it. And even if that sanding brings me back to bare wood, it's not the end of the world because I'm just clear coating this. So after, one or two coats, that spot that I got down to bare wood, it's not even going to be noticeable. Now, if I had stained this area, that would be a problem because I would sand through that stain, right? And then that's going to be an issue. I would have to restain that section. And I don't know if you've ever tried that before, but once you stain a portion, sand through, and then add a little bit of stain to try and color match that one little spot, it almost never looks right. So this way, I can kind of just do a little touch up with the sandpaper and make sure that channel is clear all the way across the mane. And then all I have to do is come back and coat it with some of the same shellac that we've already been using, both sides, and just get the thing fully protected. The shellac's amber color is only going to further enhance the stained portion of the mane here. So kind of a cool way to do it. I think it's, again, hundreds of ways that you could do this. This is just one option for you. So the next step is to seal in this color, and we'll we will top coat all of our parts, including the ones, these smaller ones that we stained brown. We'll coat them with shellac. On some of these pieces, I find it easier to just sacrifice a glove and spray it directly while holding it in my hand, give it a couple minutes to dry, and then put it down. Now, after you apply 2 decent coats to all of the pieces, give them a light sanding with 320 grit paper. It should be powdering up. If it's not, give it more time to cure. So if you find that it's kind of catching in the finish, hold off. Give it a couple hours to cure up, and then give it a light sanding to smooth it out, and then apply your final coat or 2, depending on how many. I don't think you really need more than about 4 coats for this. 3 is probably going to be sufficient. All right, so that's the point I'm at now. Just going to give everything a nice light sanding. I'll apply my final coat, and then we could focus on assembly. So for this whole project, I recommend using somewhere between 3/4 of an inch and 1 1/4 inch screws. I don't have 1 inch screws on hand, so these are the only 2 I have to work with. So depending on the piece that we're driving these into, I may use a shorter or a longer screw. So just sort of use a little common sense in how you approach that. Now what I have here are a couple of the 1 1/4 inch screws into the back support piece. And what we want to do is pre-attach the tail. Now here's the technique I'm going to use for most of this. Because our holes are already in place, if you put the screws in and you just push them out to the point that you could feel that little point there, do that for both. What that's going to do is help locate the part that's going to join up. So you could line up your holes. So once you're in place, you sort of know that you're there because it doesn't want to move beyond that. All right. So in order to get this to go smoothly, I'm going to clamp the tail to my table. Need a little more room there. And then we could start driving the screws in like so. There you go. Now for attaching the parts to the body, you're going to want something that holds the body upright. It's just going to make life a whole lot easier. So what I've got here are my wooden clamps, and they won't really mar the surface, so it's nice to have that wood-to-wood contact there, and it also helps me keep everything balanced. So I always keep a pair of these in the shop at all times. I don't often use them for true joint clamping, but I will use them very frequently for stuff like this. So just like we did before, I'm going to get the screw started. All right, so once you have those pieces poking out, you could locate the support. There we go. And drive it home. And it's really just rinse and repeat for the rest of these support pieces. Now I was about to attach my handle, and what we need to do is drill a pilot hole in the center. So you can actually just put the handle into the 3/4 inch hole on this side and drill through to create the pilot hole. But as I looked at it, I also realized that I forgot to do my countersink on this side. So I'm just going to put the handle in. You can see on this side, I just have the handle installed. And then I'm going to do the countersink and the pre-drill all in one shot. Now the ear and the footrest will get the same exact treatment as the other parts, only keep in mind we are attaching them to the other side. So the drilling has to occur from this side. So I'm going to flip this guy around, because I am right-handed, and we're going to put one footrest right here. Now just an FYI for attaching the ear, down here that hole is awfully close to the edge of the workpiece, so that is a place where I am going to go for the 3/4 inch screw instead of the 1 1/4 inch screw. But everywhere else so far I've been using the 1 1/4 inch, and it's been just fine. Now I've got the other piece in my clamps, and I'm going to attach the footrest, the ear, and the handle. To attach our two halves, I'm not going to use the clamps anymore because these things are sitting at an angle. But what I want to do is put one screw into each of the sections where it's going to attach to a center support. And just like before, I want that screw to just poke out a hair, and that's going to help us line things up and locate the two sides. And then I'm going to bring the pieces together. I'm going to start by making sure this front screw here goes in the right spot. That looks pretty good. So once that guy is in place, I'm actually going to partially drive that one home. And it's just going to help us hold things in place like another set of hands, while I come back here and do the alignment this way. Let's go ahead and drive that home. Okay, and now we could sink each of these screws in place. And let's add the remaining screws. Starting to look like something now. Now, our saddle sides are going to be attached to the body sides like so. You can just kind of center it along there. And I'm going to use construction adhesive to glue that on. The reason is because I've already got some stain and finish on the inside edge here, and there's stain and finish here, so regular wood glue just isn't going to cut it. The construction adhesive will be fine. The real key here is you want to make sure that you put a straight edge on the top, because what you're looking for is basically these 2 points right here. The point, this outer edge of the saddle side, and this outer edge of the body are really the parts that are going to hold up the flat side of the saddle. So we'll be putting a nice bead of construction adhesive right up on this edge. So we don't necessarily want to make this flush, because look what happens. You make that flush with the side. Because it's on the angle, we're only going to be making contact on the outside here, which really isn't the best idea. So bring it down just a little bit, about 1/8 of an inch, clamp it in place right there, and that should be in a perfect position for when we drop the saddle on top. All right, so with the construction adhesive on, I'm just going to use some quick clamps to hold it in place. Then I'm going to grab my ruler and drop it along the edge and kind of sight along from the front or the back here, just to make sure that things are even. And frankly, you can just kind of push down, and that will help put it into position if it's slightly off. It's looking pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And I'm going to let that dry for about a half hour. Now, while the adhesive on the saddle starts to set up, I think it's a good time to talk about these countersink holes we have here. Really, you don't have to fill them if you don't want to, and that's why I didn't include dowel stock or plug cutters or anything in the parts and materials list, because I don't think it's absolutely necessary. And in fact, if you decide not to fill them, you have a bit of an advantage here, because if you should break a part and you need to replace it, it's going to be very easy for you to access those screws, disassemble the entire thing, replace the broken part, and put it back together, like it's brand new. If you have plugs in those spaces, you're going to have a little bit of a harder time. Another thing is the outside is finished, so we're going to be, we're going to have some tricks to do here to try and get this to be flush to the surface and not damage the existing finish. So it's really up to you how you want to handle it. I can say safely that I will not be filling the plugs on the inside, just because you're never really going to see them. So I have 6 holes to fill and I have a decision to make. Do I want to go with an end grain plug, or do I want to go with a face grain plug? Now here's the big difference. End grain plugs look like these little guys right here. They're very easy to make. All you need to do is take a piece of 3/8 inch dowel rod and cut it into little pieces with your saw. And basically, a little bit of glue, pop these into the countersink hole, and then flush them to the surface. Now, there are a couple disadvantages. One is because it's end grain, the end grain is facing up, and as we know, end grain absorbs finish and stain differently than face grain. In fact, it gets darker. So these will be much more noticeable on the surface. They will not blend in nearly as well. And sometimes that can be an advantage if you want to use maybe a different colored wood or something like that to make a decorative effect with these. That's not what we're going for today, so that is a disadvantage in this case. The other thing is, because I'm using a pre-milled piece of dowel stock, this may or may not fit perfectly into that countersink hole that our countersink bit created. And in fact, I find that mine fit a little bit loose, which is the worst case scenario, unfortunately. So that's end grain. You can do that if you want to, but there is also face grain tapered plugs. The thing about these is you need a special tool to cut them. This is a little tapered plug cutter. Basically, you mount this into your drill press, you drive it down into a solid piece of stock like this, something that has the grain patterns you're looking for, drive it down into the surface, and once you make enough little plug holes, take it over to the bandsaw and make one clean cut, and the plugs just pop out. And when they come out, they look like this. You can see well, it might even be barely detectable on camera, but they're skinnier at one end than they are on the other. So the great thing is, if your hole isn't perfectly 3/8, it's okay, because you can hit a range of widths just because of this tapered action. The other thing is, and this is probably the most important, the outside edge here, the face that's going to show up when it's all said and done, is face grain. So all you need to do is align the grain with your existing piece, and this all of a sudden, pretty much disappears into the surface when you apply finish or stain. All right, so it's a little bit more work. You need a little bit more in terms of materials and tools to do this, but if you do the face grain plugs, I think ultimately you're going to be happier with the results. Okay. Now, fortunately, I didn't wind up with a whole lot of finish in these holes here, so just a little bit of yellow glue, or in my case, way too much yellow glue, should do the trick. The key, remember, is to make sure that your grain is aligned with the grain of the workpiece. Now, how do we trim these plugs flush? Well, there's a couple ways that you can handle it. First of all, wait till that glue dries, and then you can come back with a flush trim saw. See, it's a very flexible blade. There's no set on it, so it's not going to mar the surface. But just in case, I have a little bit of blue tape here that's going to help me just keep it just a little bit above the surface. Just going to take my time here and cut through. Okay, not too bad. And now I'll just use a little bit of sandpaper to further flush that plug to the surface. And you know what, if you wind up scratching your finish around the plug, don't worry about it too much, especially if you just used a clear finish like I did. That was part of the strategy to make life a little bit easier down the line. We'll be able to repair that easy enough. Now let's assume that you don't have one of these flush cut saws. You can use pretty much any handsaw that you have to cut the bulk of this away. Just keep it off of the surface because we don't want to do any damage. Take it slow toward the end of the cut. Okay. And now that it's a lot lower, we can come back with a chisel and we can start to remove some of that excess material. We're actually going to use the chisel now to bring it flush to the surface. Now there will be a point when you get too close to the surface that you don't want to keep the bevel up like this. Reverse the chisel and go with the bevel down, and this will allow you to just very carefully clean that up without gouging. Take your time. All right, so now we have a little bit of touch-up work to do. As you can see, we've got some bare spots to deal with, so I'm just going to take a little bit of the shellac on a paper towel here. Just put a little bit of a base coat. You can see already it's going to be pretty easy to disguise this. Once that initial sealer coat dries, I'm going to set my gun for very fine spray. And I think you could still pull this off with the spray can if you really want to, because I really want to just touch up this area, add a little bit of finish in a very localized region. Now you can see I overcompensated a little bit around here. It's a little bit darker than I really want it to be. So what I'm going to do is take a little 320 grit and just lightly sand around the perimeter. And I'm going to sand quite a bit of the side here because I'm just going to do one final coat over the entire side to help even things out a little bit. Now the end result is not absolutely perfect, but frankly on a piece like this, it's pretty rustic. You know, I'm not really too concerned about it. I've got a lot of knots in my wood. This is not exactly, you know, your perfectly clear wood showpiece. This is something that's going to get the crap beat out of it by a little kid, so I'm not really that concerned about it. But for the most part, you get the idea. By using shellac, especially one that has a little bit of color to it, you can sand those areas and smooth it out a little bit, and then continue to layer color until everything looks nice and smooth. And the great thing about shellac is that you could sort of sand one area and touch it up. The shellac melts into itself, unlike other finishes like polyurethane, where you would have a witness line if you were to sand through a few layers. So it's a little bit more flexible for this type of challenge that we were presented with. All right, so I think we're ready to add the saddle, and we are just about done with this rocking horse. Nothing terribly tricky here, just gonna use some of the construction adhesive. I'm gonna go right on the top here where I know we're gonna make contact. Some on this side as well. Be pretty generous with this. Okay, let's carefully drop the top in place. Let's give it a little wiggle to make sure it's fully seated. Nice. And it's probably not a bad idea to put a little weight on top of here if you can, but I don't know. I'm not sure that I need it. I feel like I'm making good contact. This stuff tends to grab very quickly. So we'll just let it sit tight for a few minutes. Well, everything that we really need the shop for is pretty much done. So I'm going to take this guy home and we'll do a few of the finishing touches at my house. So the last thing that we have to do is add a nostril and an eyeball, and this horse is ready to go. Now the nostril is really easy. I'm just using some sticky backed felt paper here. I figure something with a little texture will be a little bit more fun than just painting on a nostril. And I'm going to put it a little bit below our plug here. I don't know, that looks like where a nostril might want to be. And the other thing we need to do is add a googly eye, a wiggly eye. Now the plan calls for 28 millimeter. I say forget that. 28 is too small. I want my horse to have the biggest eyes possible. How's that? 40 millimeter, baby. So all I need to do is put a little bit of hot glue on the back here. Stick it to the surface. Oh yeah. Look at those big, beautiful eyes. So just a few days of work and the end result is a very functional, durable rocking horse. And it's for charity, so it makes it even better. The funny thing about this is actually the first thing I have ever made for a kid, and this one happens to be my own kid, so this is particularly cool for me in this situation. So the wiggly eyes are wiggling, it's rocking, everything looks pretty good, it's held together real well. The only thing left to do is to test it out.
Mark?
Ma'am?
So, I thought this was for our son.
What in tarnation? Kevin, let's go! Yeah! A big thank you to our event sponsors, Wood Magazine, Festool USA, the Wyoming School of Fine Woodworking, Lee Nielsen Toolworks, Bell Forest Products, Microjig, and Highland Woodworking. And thanks to our individual sponsors, Eric Gilling, Joseph Buscemi, and Jason Small. If you'd like to build this project or donate directly, head over to woodworkersfightingcancer.com. If you enjoyed the level of detail in this simple rocking horse project, then you're going to love the Wood Whisperer Guild. Projects like the wall hanging cabinet, the chest of drawers, and the green and green Adirondack chair are all in the archive just waiting for you. And coming up in January, we'll be doing the most ambitious project so far, the bench-crafted split-top Rubo workbench. Head to woodwhispererguild.com for more details.